DeepSeek R2 could be the atom bomb for tech stocks, and it could occur as early as April 2025 or May 2025. According to DeepSeek, they're currently working on the latest versions of it, and it does appear to be a significant threat to companies like OpenAI and also Anthropic. DeepSeek is claiming that they actually, with R2, are 40 times cheaper. And so we see that AI possibly isn't as profitable as originally was thought. And effectively, there's going to be a race to zero. And in fact, many companies may never be able to return the original investment. And so there could be a big problem uh, on the horizon for companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, and also Google, and also Microsoft, and also Meta. We could see that companies may have to lower their price quite a bit to compete. And tech companies like, let's say, Microsoft, Google, Meta, they could see a crash in terms of the stock price. So this is a very interesting scenario here. And we're going to see it play out very quick, like in the next 30 to 60 days. Also, we see that the American stock market already is in a deep dive. Tesla's down 50%. We see NVIDIA's down. And part of it is because of the uncertainty with the new policies in the Trump administration, tariffs, etc. And what can happen is that as European countries, the rest of the world, in fact, starts to distrust American technology companies, it's almost like a time bomb where DeepSeek could crash and further accelerate the crash that's happening with American tech stocks. Okay, let's dive into NVIDIA itself next. If we look at NVIDIA, NVIDIA has a very high stock price because there's an assumption that there are GPU storage issues and you need more and more GPUs. But if it's true with DeepSeek R2 that it's 40 times cheaper and you can use commodity chips and actually have very efficient methodologies and continue to make things more efficient through integration, it's a big threat to NVIDIA because NVIDIA may be way higher than it needs to be. And in fact, there could be a free fall. We also see that with DeepSeek, one of the unintended consequences of chip bans is that you're actually making it more difficult in many ways for US companies because the companies where you put this constraint on them have learned to build solutions that don't require investing lots of new hardware. So in a sense, it actually created a competitor that's more efficient. So this is almost like the innovator's dilemma problem where you have an entrenched market, you have US companies banning chips. In fact, we're hearing from Anthropic, we need to ban our competition. It's really a bad sign because it tells me that they are worried that they won't be able to compete. And so what we see here is that this smarter AI design could beat more powerful hardware. And in addition, in fact, people are more likely to want to run this local so they don't send these payloads to a cloud vendor where we don't know what happens with the data. So it's essentially like a security nightmare to be sending all these payloads to these chatbots. We also see that AI could become like cloud computing. So in the case of cloud computing, you can see that Amazon was really one of the early entrants to cloud computing, and then Microsoft, and then Google, and then Oracle, and then European clouds. And what happens is it's a race to zero. It's really a commodity race between utility companies, and we could see AI becoming a basic service as well. So we know that there is no intelligence with large language models. It's effectively like a fancy k-means clustering, search and vector space. If you look at the intelligence behind any kind of automation system, most of the widespread intelligence based systems are still going to require a human in the loop. We can see this from a good example being self-checkout. If you go to self-checkout anywhere, there always is a human that has to be involved. There are some automations, right, with self-checkout. It's kind of nice. People can go in, check out, but always there's something that doesn't work. Likewise, if the LLMs are essentially just doing pattern matching, then how could they possibly have intelligence, right? It doesn't make sense. So we see this is that this kind of pattern matching service becomes more commodity, and then anybody can do it. And in fact, anybody can do it on their local machine. And so we'll see prices drop lower and lower. So maybe $20 a month, that price point will actually go lower. So we can see that there's, in fact, a big problem. Now, in terms of big tech itself, because big tech, and by big tech, I would say Microsoft, Google, Meta, they made such a big early investment. And if it turns out that a competitor can do it 40 times cheaper, that is a pretty big threat in terms of the entire US stock market, because those companies are huge leaders in the S&P. A huge percentage of the returns of the S&P are from big tech. What could that actually do? And unrelated, we also see companies like Tesla. The brand is essentially the value is very low, negative brand value based on what they deliver. Something like 95% of people in Germany say they'll never buy a Tesla. This could cause a significant drift in a downward price pressure in terms of the stock market. And also because things are open source, just like with Linux versus Windows, we see that currently Linux has over 90% market share. Most open source software languages are dominating the top 30. Most databases are open source databases. Really, there's no precedence for closed source systems. It's really a way to stop innovation to have closed source. So what does this mean for investors? It means that tech stocks could lose significant value in the next, let's say, 2 to 6 months. We could see chip companies as well seeing less demand, and then money could possibly move out of AI hardware, and really people could start to reshift and look at things like real estate or look at integration companies, and there could be alternate things that happen as well, because if the price essentially goes to zero, like if anybody can run a large language model, they keep on getting more efficient, they become medium language models or small language models, right? They get smaller and smaller and smaller. You could see them embedded in more devices, and they could be more useful. Again, pattern matching is great, right? If they're able to do these really advanced pattern matching scenarios, they could just get smaller and smaller. But also some of the things that have been done previously start to go away as well. So for example, training on intellectual property, if some of the lawsuits play out the way they seem to be playing out, even some of the vendors that have been more free and loose with the way they've trained data could also see some significant problems. So really, in a nutshell, we see the US tech market is already under suspicion. And a lot of this is because there's a shift towards authoritarianism and isolation in the US, increased government surveillance, data control, protectionist policies. And this also is a wind at the back of lower profits in generative AI, because US-based tech companies are now going to face intense global scrutiny and distrust. And people are going to wonder about data privacy, government backdoors, and potential for AI to be weaponized for the political control. So this open source surge is going to be a powerful counter movement. And we can see a real decentralization, as not only does the stock go down, but we have a distrust of US tech giants. And you can see that there could be an alternative focus now. And because the EU is already a leader in regulation, this could become a place where the data privacy becomes the feature of the large language models versus the weakness. And you can see that local hosted and controlled infrastructure becomes not only an alternative, but becomes the preferred solution. Like, why would you send really sensitive data to a authoritarian government if you could just run it locally on your machine, right? It doesn't make sense. So we'll see potentially a huge amount of AI sovereignty initiatives where countries around the world would invest heavily in building their own AI ecosystems, prioritizing open source, local data centers, ethical AI frameworks, and also we could see global cooperation where people are developing open source software where the US has no role, right? And that's one of the things about open source is that there is no leader that can tell you, what to put into the system. It's open source. And so what we could see here is that Gen AI really turns into a tool, not a threat, right? It's a sophisticated pattern matching system. It's not true intelligence. Again, go back to the checkout of any grocery store and notice that never is it the case that every single transaction goes through. A human has to be involved. This is a trivial case, right? This is just checking out groceries. It's laughable that you could have a tool that would replace developers or replace, teachers or et cetera, et cetera. How could that possibly work if you can't even get self-checkout to work? It doesn't make sense. So the human in the loop really does become critical. It means that things are going to change where sure, people are going to use these technologies. It's just going to be a different way of working. And so it further reiterates why, if the human is in the loop, you want decentralized and transparent AI systems. And the whole AI ecosystem is going to fragment. And the US tech companies may exist still, but as we've seen with these big tech companies, there's more global scrutiny on them and less trust. And we could see, their influence goes down quite a bit in the next 10 years. So could China as well, even though it has its own trust issues, increase partnership with the EU or other parts of the world, Japan, UK, Canada? And so in many ways, the DeepSeek R2 is a atom bomb for tech, and it could create a cascading failure where big tech is never the same after the release of DeepSeek R2.